Hi, Patrick.
Hi.
Thank you for being here today.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Please pronounce your name for me so I can make sure I get it right.
It's Patrick LeClerc.
LeClerc. Okay, I was right. That wasn't as hard as I thought. I am with Patrick LeClerc. He is a fantasy sci-fi multi-genre author. Patrick, we're going to jump in. I know you had our latest release in October. Tell me a little bit about that one, and then we'll get the background on the rest of your book.
Okay, so my latest book is called The Beckoning Void. It released on ebook on Halloween. It just released on paperback, so I actually don't even have proof copies yet to hold up. And it's kind of a Victorian science fiction. It's an action adventure. It's kind of like, if you think like a Jules Verne, H.G. Wells level of science fiction. So it's futurism, but it's past futurism. So there's airships and some extra, technology, but it's largely set in the Victorian era. And we've got a band of kind of misfit heroes who have to save the world from a doomsday cult. And it involves a lot of swashbuckling and sword fighting and ship combats and escapes and subterfuge and disguises and witty dialogue. And I tried to put as much stuff as I thought was cool and cram it all into one book. That's kind of my philosophy of attacking it. So
that sounds super fun. And that sort of sounds like steampunk, is that correct?
It is. It can be classified in steampunk. Steampunk is kind of, it's looking at science fiction, but science fiction throughout generally the age of steam, industrial revolution kind of era. And that's kind of where the birth of modern science fiction kind of was, because there was so much change happening technologically at that time period that it was natural that people speculated, oh, where is this going to be in the future? And like I said, that's where you get Mary Shelley and Jules Verne and some of the Edgar Allan Poe stuff even, and 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea and The Time Machine and all these things that we're imagining. If we've gone from, you look at the difference between where we were in 1800 and where we were in 1900, you're going from, basically transportation on horseback to the beginning of like flight in that one period. So you've got a lot of change, and I think that's what made people excited about science fiction. So steampunk, as I ramble, is almost like kind of a nostalgia for that level of science fiction. So you see it's kind of become fairly popular again recently, and a lot of it is just that kind of Victorian feel with some science fiction elements thrown in.
Yeah, I like it because it's almost a romanticized sci-fi in my mind. It's a simpler sci-fi. Maybe it's a little less scary to me for some reason, because you don't have these maybe computers that are going to take over the world at some point. And I learned about steampunk three or 4 years ago when I went to my first fantasy sci-fi con. I just love the costumes and seeing everyone's dressing
it looks
up.
Great. It looks terrific.
Yes, and they're amazing. And I came back, and my uncle's a big sci-fi person, and I was describing this to him, and he was like, steampunk, I've been reading that for years, where have you been? And my husband said that too, and my husband's not even a reader. And I was like, whoa, how do you know this and you're not even a reader? He's like, everybody knows this. So yeah, I was behind the 8 ball on that one, I guess. Yeah. Well, that's cool.
That's kind of my thing. Like I always enjoyed it. I always thought it was kind of a cool idea, and that's why I finally decided to write a book in it, because I'm like, you know what, I want to play in that sandbox. And
is this going to be a series or a standalone?
It's pretty much going to be a series. The book is a standalone. You can totally read it. It has a conclusion, but I had so much fun with these characters that I'm starting to write another book with the same, following the same characters, because they're just a lot of fun. And I just enjoyed it tremendously. So
Awesome. Characters can do that too. They kind of get under your skin and you can't let them go.
exactly.
So tell us about your other books.
So I have a bunch. I have 6 other books and like I said, they kind of span the fantasy and science fiction genre. The first book that I wrote was an urban fantasy called Out of Nowhere, about a character who's an immortal, who has the ability to heal people with a touch. And he doesn't have fully have his earliest memories. But he knows that from having survived for centuries, the people people don't trust what they don't understand, and sometimes they lash out against it. So he's tried to live incognito. So now he's in the modern day, he's working as a paramedic because it lets him go to injured people, heal them without really a whole lot of scrutiny. And he can stay in a fairly, not in the spotlight kind of job, and nobody's going to question that when he gets the patient to the hospital, they're better off than when they were, because that's kind of expected. And then some complications from his distant past come back and put him in danger, and that's the story that drives the book. And it's kind of, like I said, it's kind of, if you look at I wrote it in like a detective noir kind of style, because I like that, like the snarky detective, even though he's not a detective, but it's that feel. So it's kind of like, if you look at Spencer for Hire meets Highlander, is kind of the way I look at it. I put a science fiction spin on it, but a lot of it's that, noir, sarcastic, cynical outlook on life. And that let me play with my passions. I got a degree in history, so it let me pull on things from history, because he could have been in the past at various events that I could describe. I could use the setting of a paramedic in an economically depressed mill town, because that's what I was. And so that was easy to draw on experiences and make that feel kind of real. And I just really enjoyed it. So that was my first book. And I did a sequel to that, was Spitting Image, which was the same character in another situation. And then I decided to go in a different direction, and I did a kind of a pulp sword and sorcery in the fashion of the old, like Fafhrd and the Great Mouser, Fritz Lieber stuff, the Robert E. Howard kind of Conan feel, though like short, quick, action-oriented fantasy stories, because I miss those. I read those when I was younger, and then things kind of transitioned into the big epics. And there's nothing wrong with the big epics, but I miss a couple of like kind of rogue type characters who go on a quick little adventure, steal some jewels, and make their escape, and find out that their money's gone, and now they have to go on another adventure, kind of thing. And that's just fun, and I missed it. So I did a couple of books in that, where I have a pair of platonic buddy rogues who go and they engage in, petty theft and sword fights and chases across rooftops, and encountering ancient guardians in ancient temples and spells. And again, it's all the stuff that I thought was fun and cool. And I did a sequel to that one. So there's 2 of the urban fantasy, 2 of the sword and sorcery books. And then I decided I was going to write a military science fiction, just because why not? The thing is, I like so many different subgenres that I want to play in all the sandboxes. I wanted to do, it's Space Marines, it's kind of near future, it's in the solar system. They're on a ship that's patrolling the asteroid belt, and there's pirates, there's valuable ores being mined in the asteroid belt, and and there's, government conspiracies and piracy and corporations kind of shadily moving behind the scenes to do stuff. And again, it's action and adventure, and that was in every climb and place, which is every climb and place comes from a line from the Marines hymn, but I figured every climb and place now includes space, and that was kind of a cool idea, and I had fun with that. And then I've done a bunch of short stories. I had a historical fiction novella where I put my character from out of nowhere back in it's called Advancing on Paris. I put him in Napoleon's retreat from Moscow because it was an interesting time period to be in. And it's him, he gets separated from his retreating army, and he has to use his wits and his natural talent and it's just a badly accented Russian to try to blend in and escape and survive that. So that was just an interesting thing to play with. And now, rather than develop any of these series further on, I decided I would go in a whole new direction, and I would play with a steampunk horror adventure kind of thing. So I'm all over the map.
Well, it sounds like no matter what genre you're writing in, you're having tons of fun and really weaving in all these elements from your life, the history, the military background, your background as paramedic, and they just sound like really fun books.
And that's really what I'm looking for. I'm looking to have fun with it. I want it to be fun and entertaining.
Your military side, I just watched that movie, Don't Look Up. Have you watched the movie yet? The brand new one?
I haven't seen it yet, no.
That's what your military sci-fi, government, espionage, and plots and company plots to steal the ores off the asteroids are definitely reminding me of that movie. So you should look it up.
I will definitely check it out. It's on my list.
Unfortunately, I watched it the day before we had to evacuate from the fires, and I thought it was all my fault. So don't watch it when you're feeling a little vulnerable, because the next day you'll be like, what is going to happen tomorrow? And unfortunately, as authors, we have this creative brain, and we could create lots of different things that may go wrong in our world, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, I think it's really fun that you wove in your first urban fantasy character. I didn't get his name, but that he was a paramedic, that he was healing people. That sounds like the perfect place for him to be, because if he was a doctor, he might have too many people, too many eyes on him, but as a paramedic, he's going in and out.
Exactly. The character's name was Sean Dene, and that's one of the challenges I had with that. It was fine for writing that book, but when I wanted to put him in, do some earlier historical stuff with him, I realized he would have had to change. He would have had to change his name and identity as he got older, because he can't. The same guy is kicking around for centuries. So it wasn't like I could just call it like that, like you have like the Harry Dresden series, or you have the, Kate Daniels kind of series. I couldn't really do that because his name changes throughout history.
Interesting.
And again, everybody's like, well, you just keep the same name. I'm like, no, because if you go back to his history, he's going to have to be like Marcus Aurelius kind of thing. And nobody's going to be, you're going to remember if your paramedic's last name is, Marcus Decius Moose kind of thing. So
right.
It kind of had to change with the times. So, but that's what I played with that.
Interesting. Yeah, you're right. That would be a challenge, because you want people to remember his character name because he's the same character, but then he might have to change that over time. So that would be, and maybe you could change it a little bit, like instead of Sean whatever, he could be Sean someone else. But interesting. And I lost my train of thought on that one.
I'm sorry.
What type, do you ever tell what type of paranormal character he is, or why he's immortal, or does he know anyone like himself?
To a certain extent, yes. He kind of discovers it as he goes, and it's not nailed down exactly why he is how he is, but there are other groups of supernatural characters in the world. And again, they've kind of tried to operate kind of on the in the fringes, because again, people don't trust what they don't understand, and they tend to react badly to it. So, and it's not that they don't all have the same powers and abilities. There's different abilities, and I left it kind of open whether this is an evolutionary mutation kind of thing where it just shows up in certain. I mean, it's not nailed down because he doesn't exactly know, so it's not out in the book. But whether this is like an X-Men kind of situation where mutations show up, some of them are beneficial, some of them aren't, and the ones that make people powerful get passed down. And again, these people try to stay out of the limelight, and that's one of the things he encounters from his past. Somebody notices that, you know, somebody who is another gifted person gets an injury, gets healed, and is like, that was too easy, and starts to suspect. And then he's on the run from them. I don't know if we lost. Oh, there you go. I don't know if we lost a little bit of connection for a minute. It got kind of jerky.
That's okay. Yeah. So, and you said he doesn't remember all of his history either. So he doesn't know if he had parents or what that situation
Exactly.
was. That's like a really, that you could do a lot of things with that series and that character. It sounds really neat. What, can you still hear me?
And I'll be honest, I think it taps into my writing. Yes.
Okay.
The video is kind of lagging a little, so I don't know if we're still.
Okay. I can hear you fine. We're good.
Okay, great. Part of it, I'm going to be brutally honest, is the way that I write. I'm not a detailed outliner, so I didn't build the whole history behind his character and exactly why he could do what he could do. I had an idea, and I started running with it and writing a story. And so as I wrote and more things occurred to me, I filled in the blanks. That's kind of how I work better that way. So I left a lot of stuff open-ended so that I could fill it in as I went.
Well, as a reader, you don't want to know everything in the beginning either, right? Like that's too much to take in as a reader. So it's fun to discover those little historical nuggets or the past story as you're reading. At least I think it is.
Yeah, well, good, because that's how I write. So people like that.
I think I do that too. Like sometimes I have to go back in reverse and do some reverse story world building and story building. So
yeah, I'm not. I mean, and everybody has their own approach. You look at like Tolkien invented whole languages and cultures for his stories. I respect that and I like it, but that's not what I want to do. I want to get the characters into a situation and play with them.
Fun. What inspired you to start writing?
Actually, that ties back to Tolkien. The first fantasy book that I read The Hobbit, and I was in 5th grade, so I was like 9 or 10. And I thought, this is amazing. You can do that? We can make up stories like this? Like we can have dragons and dwarves and wizards and this whole other world, and you can just do that? And I thought that was just the coolest idea. So I kind of, since then, I've always been, you know, thinking up stories, and throughout high school and college, I wrote, and a lot of it's very, you know, typical derivative early writing stuff. But that was my gateway drug to fantasy. After that, I needed to find more. Obviously, I read The Lord of the Rings. I read everything else that I could find that was out there then. That's when I picked up the older stuff, like the Robert E. Howard stuff and the Edgar Rice Burroughs and Fritz Leiber and some of those guys that were writing, you know, the short science fiction fantasy that originally came from the old pulp novels, like the Weird Tales and Amazing Stories and that kind of thing. And then in the 80s, when I was in high school, a bunch of the epic trilogy fantasies started becoming big. And so I read all those, and I just really devoured anything I could find. And that's what started me on my path down because every time I read something in a world, I was like, that's really a cool world. I'd like to do something like that. And I think I assume that's how most of us writers are. We see things and we get inspired by them and we want to play around with them or do something in a similar vein.
Very cool. Yeah, the first fantasy series I read, and I think it was in 3rd or 4th grade, was Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz, and by L. Frank Baum. And now that I'm thinking, I'm like, well, that's steampunk, I think.
It kind of is. It really is.
Ships, but the technology wasn't much beyond the flying ships, and in Oz was that steampunk world. So that's interesting that I just made that connection for myself. So you just released in October Halloween, your steampunk book. Remind me the title of that one again.
It's called The Beckoning Void.
The Beckoning Void, and the paperback just came out. What do you have on your agenda next?
So I started some work on the sequel to that, the second book, which I don't have a title for yet, but I'm coming up with ideas for that. I've just started writing some initial scenes in that. And I was going to write a second sequel to my military science fiction. I actually started it and I got partway into it, and it's going to sound terrible, but my dystopian future seemed too optimistic with the dystopian present we were living in. So that kind of derailed me. So I'll probably come back to that. I just got, real life politics just kind of got too real for me to be writing. And I didn't want to write government conspiracies. I didn't want to write that thing at the time because it felt like it was, I originally wrote it, the first book came out in like 2012, 2014, when we were in a very different time period, when I felt like it was easier to play with that kind of thing. And then by the time I was writing the sequel in like 2018, I'm like, no, it's just not. We were in a different place and I didn't think it was I didn't feel good writing it. So I stopped it, and I may come back to it. I may tweak it. So that's a half-written book. But right now I'm working on the sequel to The Beckoning Void, because it was just so much fun to play with those characters, and I can't let them go. So.
Well, I love that you aim to make your books fun and escape for readers. That's definitely what I look for in a book, and I think a lot of people do. I also had a dystopian book come out in 2019 about a worldwide pandemic, and not surprisingly, I stopped writing the sequel to that book as well.
Exactly. It's like, that's not fun anymore.
No, it's not fun anymore. Well, it's been so great talking to you, Patrick. Let everyone know where we can find you and your book.
Okay, so all my stuff is on Amazon. If you want to go to my personal website, it's inkandbourbon.com. And that has links to all my work, plus a bunch of stuff that I've had in various short story online publications and some anthologies that I contributed to. I'm on Facebook and Twitter. If you look for Patrick LeClerc, you'll find me on those. And that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing your books with us.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Take care.
Yep. Bye-bye.